So I want to immediately jump into the right frame of mind for this keynote, so we're going to start with our imaginations. I want you to take a deep breath. I'm going to ask you a question about yourself. Now think to yourself the one ability or gift that you have that you especially bring to the world. It doesn't have to be fully unique, but a clear something that you in particular bring to the world. Maybe you're always fun. Maybe you always notice when people are hurting and you follow up. Maybe you're an organizer. So think of the one thing you bring to the world, and then tell the person next to you what it is. Okay, other person. All right, can we hear a couple? Just say them out loud. So now you have to make them concise, like name something. Laughter. Inspiration, good.
Bad jokes and good coffee.
Some of my favorite things. Awesome. I organize things. Okay, another exercise which is a little bit more complicated. Think of your congregation or your religious community. You can pick the one that comes to mind. What is the one ability or gift that your congregation brings to the world? Like you always care for children, or you always work for justice, or you always have inspiring worship, or something I couldn't even imagine. What's the one gift that your congregation brings to the world that is perhaps distinct from other gifts that other communities might bring? Tell it to the person on the other side of you. All right, other side. All right, let's hear a few. Not a big long essay, but who can identify something their community particularly brings to the world? Commitment towards youth. Genuine welcome. Hospitality. Justice. A beacon of liberalism. Diversity. I didn't hear that one. Inclusiveness. Youth ministry. Activism. You guys are awesome. Passion. Support for each other. A home away from home. A home away from home. Thank you. I want you to hold on to that notion, the notion of the gift or specialty that you and your congregation bring to the world, the one that might be unique or particularly needed in your community. The title of my talk this morning is You Can't Spell Church Without J-O-Y. And this title really annoyed my 17-year-old he'll be 18 on Wednesday. He's going through a bit of a righteous phase, for which I only have myself to blame. But he said, all exasperated, "Mom, that's not how that sort of joke works. The letters are supposed to be from the word, but they also mean something else." And I responded with, "That's why it's funny." And I got an eye roll. I'm sure you guys never do that. So that is why it's a funny title, right? Because church doesn't contain the letters J or O or Y. And that's also why it's sad, right? Because why it's true. Because my experience has been that often sometimes, often, you decide, our churches don't contain much joy at all. Today I'd like to talk a bit about why that might be and what we might do to bring some joy back, and also a little on what the future of our faith might look like, all in under 45 minutes, so buckle up. Let me tell you a bit about why I came to work for the Unitarian Universalist Association, because I am here at the UUA entirely because of this question of finding the joy in our congregations. Before I started working for the UUA, I was the minister of a small congregation outside of Washington, D.C., up the tech corridor, that is Interstate 270, in what remains of the country of Upper Montgomery County, Maryland. That congregation is called Sugarloaf because it lives under the long shadow of Sugarloaf Mountain. It would be easy to assume I chose Sugarloaf because I had a deal with the universe that I would go into ministry, but I would not be moving out of my house. That's partially true. But also I chose that congregation because they did church just the way I thought church ought to be done. They were largely introverts, those tech corridor folks, so although they really enjoyed being together, they weren't creating tons of potlucks or social gatherings or extra community time, and that worked for me, also an introvert. They were often agnostic scientists or IT types, but were of a generation where their scientific orientation made them wonder about the world and be open to awe and mystery. They weren't focused on reacting against dogma or superstition. I love folks who know science and want to talk about the meaning of life and how the universe works. And they were around my age, or maybe up to 10 years older, so they almost always had full-time jobs and both teenagers and older parents to care for. Like me, they had no extra time on their hands, not even an hour. And yet, they made an extraordinary effort to create and be a part of a church. They made what I came to see as pure church in many ways, where their priorities were made clear in the things they paid for and the things they showed up for. The things they showed up for. Sunday morning, for themselves and their kids, yes. A beautiful rustic hillside church to meet upon, a true sanctuary away from that interstate they all lived near and drove on, yes. A deep-seated orientation towards questioning and wondering and making the most out of their lives and their choices, yes. A willingness to take what they learned or experienced in church and make the world they went out to better and braver and more Unitarian Universalist, yes. Maintaining those buildings, not so much. Paying the minister on time, not so much. Having lots of extra committee meetings, luckily not so much. Marching on Washington, no thanks. Welcoming the stranger, absolutely. Growing the church? Not really, except accidentally. You can see where I'm going with this. They are among the best of our small churches. Relationship, great. Spiritual focus, great. Structure, meh. I still can't imagine what could be better than a congregation that prioritizes spiritual development for all ages, prioritizes peace and sanctuary, and is itself a kind of sanctuary, and is genuinely welcoming and inclusive. I was so honored that they called me and so delighted to serve them. They were unadulterated church, perfect in several of the most important ways. Yet they didn't feel perfect. They weren't very happy or confident, and we were burning people out like they were on a conveyor belt right to the mouth of hell. So what was going on? Where was the energy? Where was the joy? Sugarloaf was also the quintessential small church because they had been told by absolutely everyone that they were supposed to be a large church. In this case, I mean this quite literally. Sugarloaf was a fast start congregation back in the day when that was a UUA program, and they were deliberately planted in Upper Montgomery County, Maryland in 1996 with the intention of becoming a megachurch. But it wasn't just that. Like every church in our movement, like most every church in mainstream Protestantism in the past 70 years, Sugarloaf was completely sure that in order to think of themselves as a real church, They had to have a full-service church. Full service meant their own minister, full-time. It meant weekly Sunday worship in their own space, and if they didn't own it, they'd work towards owning something soon. It meant religious education offerings for every age child, birth through graduation, and why not have a lively young adult program too? It meant doing some serious repair on this broken world of ours. It meant being financially stable. As I've said, on these measures as a whole, Sugarloaf fell down again and again. They fell down and they could not get up. When they finally whacked one of the moles, 3 other moles would pop up. And somehow the things that they were didn't count. What counted and what they primarily worked on was trying to make it into the mold that had been set for them, the mold of the full-service mid-sized church. How can it be, I wondered every workday, that this is a failed church when they have so much to offer the world? How is this so when we could teach other churches a bunch of the stuff they're claiming to want if only they could maybe do our payroll, which they seem pretty good at? Are we really supposed to push down our individuality and ruin our potential in pursuit of this full-service norm? Are we to trade, say, authentic inclusivity for excellent buildings and grounds maintenance? Can I oversee such an effort and still be true to my call? There's something I didn't know then about the arc of church life that I do know now, and I want you to know too. That full-service way of organizing religion, the one with the minister and the building and the weekly worship and the religious education for all and being financially stable, that full-service model that is the foundation for nearly every Unitarian Universalist congregation in our whole country, that model worked very well from around 1945 to 1975 and has not been working as well on an incremental but steady rate of decline since then, since 1975, which, if you can't add very well, is more than 40 years ago. In fact, in recent years, people who have studied religious life have been running around like chickens with their heads cut off because of how poorly this church model has been working. I suspect this will not come as news to many of you, but churches of all stripes who have their roots in mainline Protestantism, like we do, because the forms and functions of our congregations are almost indistinguishable from mainline Protestantism. Churches of all stripes who have their roots in mainline Protestantism report that it's hard to make budget, it's hard to get volunteers, it's hard to staff committees, it's hard to get visitors or new members, and it's hard to get kids to show up each Sunday. Buildings that church members once worked so hard to buy are getting shabby, and there's no money to fix them. And the will is missing when the space doesn't really work for the needs of the day. Budgets get smaller, and congregations eventually have to choose between the property they own and full-time ministry, or eventually any ministry at all. It's hard to attract new members when the current members are so anxious about money and volunteer time. Families are busy and isolated and often don't know what church can do for them to help. So what was the right way to do church, the full-service church model, can feel not only not joyful, but that it sucks joy away that might otherwise be there. My board president at Sugarloaf said, "You all talk about how much you love this place, but when I pull into the driveway, I feel sick to my stomach because I don't know how we're going to pay the mortgage or fix the roof." So you can see that for my leaders and for myself, we had lost the joy. We were doing good, but we felt no joy. We felt anxiety and depression. That board president left the church after her term ended. I'm sure you can tell a similar story. I wanted us to be who we were and not try so hard all the time to be what we weren't. And every church I talked to seemed to be the same, striving to be better at things they weren't good at. Sugarloaf was great at flexibility, welcome, and spiritual focus. Terrible at finances and building maintenance. The church 20 minutes down the road was exactly the opposite. They wanted to be great at flexibility, spiritual focus, and welcome. They had a full-time staff of 15 people, and they could get payroll out like nobody's business. Did we ever talk to that church? Did we ever see if we could line up, learn from each other, help each other? No, we never did. In fact, we were always a little ashamed, like we can't talk to anyone to align resources because it shows that we're messing up in so many ways. How misguided. I don't know about you, but in my work life, I love it when I can use my strengths to make a unique contribution to the whole. That's what I love about our Central East Region staff team. I'm pretty good at seeing the big picture and building bridges between all the parts. That's what I do. I don't have to be great at youth programming, because that's what Evan and Shannon do. I don't have to be great at leadership development because Renee is called to that. It would be annoying and stressful to work with 11 other people who also wanted to see the big picture and build bridges. I want to work with those who are great at things I'm terrible at, so that I don't have to do that work myself. That fills me with joy, to think that I can bring my best self and not my worst self to any project. In my Unitarian Universalist theology, our uniquenesses are best combined to create a community of strength. The strength of our body depends on the unique contributions of all the people who choose to participate. I don't use the term body accidentally. The same concept is called being the body of Christ in Christianity. And the idea is that just like a body, you need all the unique bits to create the whole. If I'm an earlobe and you're a nostril, I may not be able to see you, and I definitely don't fully understand what you do. But I, earlobe, need you, nostril, to be my best self, because an earlobe without a body is useless at best and sort of gross if you spend too much thinking about it. Bodies need earlobes and nostrils, and without the body, earlobes and nostrils have no reason to be. If I'm an earlobe on a body, then I don't need to make more earlobes. Well, maybe one other earlobe, so that I can use both my earrings. What I need is to make sure that if you're a nostril, then I do everything I can to help you be the best nostril that you can be. Same for fingers and hair and livers. It is in my best interest to encourage your uniqueness. It is not in my best interest to pursue the creation of more earlobes. Forcing all churches to be one shape, the full-service model church, is like telling churches all to be earlobes. Or maybe something more important, like telling them all to be hearts. Even if all 1,000 of our congregations could be hearts, that would still be pretty weird for the overall body, right? And let's face it, we aren't all hearts. We aren't all meant to be hearts, and being the other things is important too. One thing I learned, finally, and the thing I hope you'll really understand today, is that it's okay to be who you are. It's deeply okay for you to be who you are as a person, and it's more than okay for you to be who you are as a congregation too. I really mean that. If you turned to your neighbor and said, we're great at putting on that one big community day where we make a meal for the whole town and everyone comes to the doors and it's a tradition and lots of people get together, then that's your thing. Hold on to that. Thank you for bringing that to the world of religion. Your uniqueness, brought with joy, makes a difference in the world. If you said that our founding members were teachers at heart and there's nothing we do better than making sure that our kids feel safe to be who they are and that they are loved and grounded, then hold on to that. Thank you for bringing that to us. Once you can tell what your special something is as a congregation, once you see what part of the body you are, once you see what you can bring that few others can do as well, then you have some decisions to make too. You need to decide if you're going to hold on to a 70-year-old model of full-service church that was created because of a huge underemployed female workforce and a church-going culture at large, neither of which exists today. Or you could decide to change from trying to do all those things to concentrating on just the things you do well. We call that focused mission. I'd like to suggest to you that focused mission is the path you want to take as you look towards your next few generations of congregational life. Especially if you've been feeling the stresses and strains of the wider shift in religious life for a while now, and you agree with me that the joy is missing from your church experience and you'd really like that to change. The way to change it and the way to prepare for your next chapter as a congregation is to focus your mission. Focus your mission. Not to tweak your systems, not to entice new families somehow, not to hire some young hip minister with lots of energy, although everybody loves a young hip minister with lots of energy. The answer is to focus your church's mission, your purpose in the world, to align with your passions and your gifts, the things that your church already does better than most everybody. And then your task is to work closely with others who have done the same so that you can be complete. Theologian Howard Thurman tells us that we should do the work in the world that makes us come alive, because what the world needs most is people who have come alive. I think we also need religious communities that have come alive. This might seem scary, right? Because you can probably already glean that if I'm telling you to turn your attention somewhere, I'm also telling you to turn your attention away from somewhere else. And that somewhere else, well, it might just be a lot of what you know and love about church. Maybe spending every Sunday morning in a pew at church listening to clergy talk is a thing that you love, a thing you've been doing your whole life. It's something I love. Maybe you were one of the ones who bought your building, hoping it would be a center of the community and a joy for decades to come. Maybe your kids came up through your church's RE program and you spent tons of your own time sharing that gift with other people's kids and can't imagine a church that didn't do that basic thing. In 1841, one of our Unitarian ministers, Reverend Theodore Parker, delivered an ordination speech where he talked about the difference between the transient and the permanent in religious life. He began his sermon by saying, and remember that Parker was a Unitarian Christian, as all Unitarians were in his time. He began by saying that a few people tell us the day of Christianity is past. They would persuade us that hereafter piety must take a new form. The teachings of Jesus are to be passed by. Let us therefore devote a few moments to this subject, although ironically he then spoke for a very long time. and consider what is transient in Christianity and what is permanent therein. The topic seems not inappropriate to the times in which we live or the occasion that calls us together. Leaving aside the painful irony that I'm essentially saying the exact same thing here in 2018, 177 years later, let's see what Parker then goes on to say about the transient and the permanent. Parker noted back in 1841 how remarkable it is that the words and deeds of Jesus, who spoke of love of God and love of neighbor, and who lived in a way that showed how that love might make a difference, Parker noticed that the message of those words and that life had lasted for what at the time were 17 centuries and what are now more than 19 centuries. During the same time, Parker pointed out, the words of other great people whose names shook whole continents, though graven in metal and stone, though stamped in institutions and defended by whole tribes of priests and troops of followers, those other men's words have gone to the ground. 17 centuries, now 19, where the great works of other people have arisen and then perished without leaving a mark. 17 centuries of wisdom, intelligence, art, song, religious rituals, honored as divine in their day, now not a trace of which is seen. All of these things fallen by the wayside, Parker said, but the simple story of Jesus' life and his ability to love and to sacrifice, that word remains through it all. And Parker said, how fleeting is what man calls great. How lasting what God And you can put the holy or the ultimate in here if you want. How lasting what God pronounces true. How fleeting what we human beings call great. What we human beings often try to cling to as permanent. We are tempted in 1841 and in 2018. We are tempted to think our structures and systems must last forever. How wrong we are. It's hard to think all the churchly things we love are meant to be temporary. Yet it's true, isn't it? I know how much you love your church and the time that you've put into it being the way that it is today. No one can or wants to take that away. But the world around us is changing faster than anyone could have ever imagined. And this is no time for a religion based on the best thinking that 1950 had to offer. The world needs all of our passion, all of our strength and intelligence and love and reason and kindness and compassion. It needs all of that right now. It needs all of that yesterday. I am here to recommend that all of your attention and your energy in your congregational life ought to be focused on the thing that makes you come alive and the work that is needed to take you there. I'm an institutionalist who is about to make some startling statements. Your governance doesn't really matter. Oh, it gets better. Your building doesn't really matter. Your stewardship drive doesn't really matter, and your endowment doesn't really matter. Nothing matters but the thing you're alive for, the thing that only you, your church, your people can do for this hurting world. Everything else is passing. Everything else is transient. I don't care if you always worship together or you never do. I don't care if you always serve kids or you never do. I don't care if you never have a board meeting or you don't know what policy governance is or if you've never paid off your mortgage or you never had a mortgage. That is transient, transient, transient. And I say if there's 1 minute that the forms of what you are doing as a church are getting in the way of the thing that is making you come alive, then tear it down. Tear it down and get back to what makes all of you alive, no matter how narrow or particular or weird that thing might seem. Go back there and start again. Parker. Forms and opinions change and perish, says Parker. Forms and opinions change and perish, but the Word of God cannot fail. We need to spend far more time wondering about the permanent Word of God in our institutions. The modern New You way to say Word of God is this: what does love and life call us to do in this time with these people? What does love and life call us to do in this time with these people? When we replace our true permanent call to serve love and life in our time with our people, when we replace this true call with service to an outdated structure that doesn't serve that call, a structure that doesn't make us come alive in our mission, then we are constructing idols and we are telling our people to worship them. I believe that we have been telling our Unitarian Universalists to worship idols for years, the idols involved in what we call sustainable church. When someone comes for worship and we give them the worship committee, we give them an idol. When someone comes for community and we give them the board of trustees, that's an idol. When we can't enjoy our own chosen faith anymore, the faith that called at least some of us to serve it with our lives. When we can't enjoy it anymore because we've worried ourselves sick over our budget, that's worshiping an idol. Please, let's stop. Our institutions are not gods. They are vehicles. And when the vehicle is onerous and saps everyone's energy and isn't doing a thing but protecting itself, then you need to say, we all need to say, time for something new. I'm not afraid of change. I'm afraid of the inability to change that Unitarian Universalism sometimes shows. What is needed now is nimbleness. What is needed now is attention to the permanent, not the transient. That's what we do in times of church change. We remember that we are part of a long and endless story of love and hope and humanity that goes back eons and will extend for eons more. I fear there are eons of UUA staffers who have gone out to congregations to deliver a doomsday message too, and I want to veer away from that. I don't want to be yet another person from Boston, even though I don't live in Boston, but you know what I mean. I think we're all tired of the trope of UUA people coming out and delivering scary warnings about how you're not doing enough, you have to change, or everything's going to die. That's not joyful, is it? But the truth is, you can choose to orient yourself to be relevant to your people and your community and your time, or you can choose not to. There are so many ways to be relevant. I would never tell you which one to pick. Some of our church leaders feel they're too old to change and learn new things, but I tell you, there are a billion ways to be relevant to an older demographic that's far from family and feels abandoned by a youth-obsessed culture. What a lot of good can be done there. But if you aren't relevant at all, if you feel that your congregation is too tired to figure out how to be relevant, or if your membership needs far more than it is able to give, then it might be time for you to talk to UUA staff about how to transition into being something other than a UU church. That happens, and there's no shame to it. It's far better than you spending your energy and time and your last chunk of money trying to hold on to the vestiges of a way of doing church that is becoming more misunderstood and unpopular by the day. You can let everything go so you can be something new. And maybe that something new means that you take a completely new form. Maybe your building is used to host community classes now. Maybe your assets fund important service work in your community now. Any good scientist will tell you that matter is neither ever created or destroyed, just turned into something new. If your church in its current form needs to change, that neither takes away from the important legacy you have left behind, nor does it preclude additional good that might grow in the future. Applause. We on UUA staff can help you discern a path forward if this feels like the situation that you're in. A couple of years ago, when I was starting at the UUA, we staff were beginning to prepare ourselves for a rash of church closings. I don't know if you remember that particular moment. We felt it was inevitable given the trajectory of American religion and the average ages of our congregants. I guess thinking that way was probably all very logical. What has happened instead, however, has been startling to me and a source of joy in my work. Yes, some congregations have closed, but very few so far. In my experience, it's much more common that a congregation comes very close to closing. They have been struggling for years or decades, and they finally hit a budget that seems like the last straw. Something has to change. One of the options is to close the door, and the other options are all some version of risk or leaping into the unknown and change. Risk and leaping into the unknown and change are not at all the favorite behaviors of UU churches. My staff and I can attest. I was sure that many of those congregations facing those choices would simply give up. Well, in my neck of the woods down in DC, they almost never give up. There's something about crisis and impending ruin that lets those churches let go and leap out wildly and faithfully towards deep change and towards joy and towards their true calling. It is these churches that I love to work with the most. Not the ones who can make it through another year or 3 by playing it safe. No, the ones who can't make it anymore. The earlobes with no body, who find a way to connect with something bigger. They grind down to who they essentially are and they propel themselves into the next transient chapter, using the permanent as the rock they jump from. It is possible for us to meet the spiritual, relational, and justice needs of the current day with the people we already are and the congregations that we already have. It is possible. I have seen it done. And if it can be done anywhere, it can be done here. I hope and assume you already know that this part of the country has a specific and special religious history. It is called the Burned Over District, this area of Western and Central New York, because of how heavily y'all were evangelized during the Second Great Awakening, which was a religious revival that happened in the first half of the 1800s, around when Theodore Parker was writing, coincidentally, or maybe not. Renee reminded me of this, so I went to the Wikipedia page and was astonished to be reminded of how many relevant, unusual, context-specific religious movements have been created or grown right here. The Second Great Awakening, the Church of the Latter-day Saints, Millerism, which led to the Seventh-day Adventists and Jehovah's Witnesses, Spiritualism, which led to the seance craze of the early 1900s, the Oneida community, which held plenty of Unitarians and Universalists, Shakers, the social gospel movement, which led directly to our national social welfare safety net and our child labor laws. Now, you may have theological or cultural disagreements with many of these religious movements, or you may notice that some don't exist anymore, but Theodore Parker wants to remind you that none of these forms are going to last forever. That's not an option, so don't seek it out. What all these religious movements were relevant to the religious needs of their day. They all met their people where they were and helped them get to where they wanted to be. They were creative and flexible. They changed the religious status quo as needed in order to be seen and accepted. And they were deeply impactful on the religious landscape that we're in today. So I am not worried, St. Lawrence Seaway Gathering. I know it is in your bones and your blood, in the very dirt upon which you stand, to change what needs to be changed to recreate impactful, relevant religion. I know you won't be afraid of your uniqueness and your gifts, but will use them in a community of others doing the same to make the world a better place. And I know that your efforts will make a difference now and for a long, long time. Thank you in advance for bringing what makes you alive to Unitarian Universalism. Thank you for bringing the J and the O and the Y to church. We are so grateful. Thank you.